Hi, this is Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church, located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement. And I want to share a couple of thoughts. A lot of times we wonder why in the Black community we lack power, political power. We have people in offices, but very rarely does that translate into, a positive influence on our community. If you look at the communities of color in the major cities, especially like Chicago, Atlanta, Baltimore, Philadelphia, have a pretty good percentage of Black people, and they have a lot of Blacks that are in political power. But yet we still have very horrible conditions, for Black people. And one of the things that's always stuck out for me is during election cycles, they always have these get out the vote campaigns. But the problem is, in my estimation, is because we vote for the same principles have gotten us or kept us in a bad place. And so, because we focus on people and political parties instead of actual platforms and the principles that will help to strengthen our community, we stay in this perpetual cycle of a downward spiral. The conditions of Black America is probably as bad, if not worse, than they were 50 years ago. I'm saying, and when you take it in, in comparison to other community that has digressed as far as economic, they were positive, low unemployment under the previous administration, low unemployment, $1,000 annually, which was a good thing. But when we look at the overall condition in these major cities, we have to look at it and understand why it is. So I'm going to take you back to 1865. So in 1865, of course, you had the Civil War's over. You have the slavery is abolished now because of the Emancipation Proclamation. And soon after that, Black people have been given the right to vote. This was 1865, right? So constitutional amendment that gave Black people the right to vote. Now you had a presidential election between Ulysses S. Grant was the presidential candidate, Republican, because you know that the Republican Party was actually created as the anti-slavery party. And so, of course, the first opportunity that Black people got to vote, they voted overwhelmingly for the Republican candidate, Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant, when voted for, or Black males, I should say, that voted for Ulysses S. Grant. So overwhelmingly, they realized that Black people now would represent the swing vote because the nation was somewhat divided. Black people represented the swing vote. So the first thing they did is you had, Jim Crow in the South, and also you had voter suppression. Now, we have these terms that they use. They use these terms, and these terms are really misleading and misguiding. They're used to deceive when they talk standard legal ID in order to vote, to confirm your identity is not voter suppression. That's a deceptive thing that people are using that to twist things around. So people would, many of the Black people were freed slaves because slavery, of course, was abolished in 1865. So they made literacy tests as one of the regulations for you being able to vote. The reason that was a hindrance is because before the emancipation, someone who legally was not able to read, hindered from learning to read, and you give a literacy test in order for them to vote, that's obviously trying to suppress their vote. They sometimes fee. And of course, these were poorer people, so they didn't have the money. So these were intentional things that were done to keep Black people from voting, right? So now you had, fast forward a little bit, protected, and even some legislation in the meantime that made some of these tactics illegal, right? The voter suppression things. But in 1964, with the Civil Rights Act, it secured the Black Americans' ability to vote legally, right? So realize that now Black people would have the ability to vote without any hindrances. And so they began to come up with ways in order to sway the voter to their party. So this was Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was a Democrat and was very racist. He was a well-known documented racist. And they asked him, why is it that he all of a sudden switched and started to support the civil rights thing that, I'm paraphrasing. He said, for the first time, blacks have become very uppity, but they have something to go along with their uppityness, which is the right to make them think that we care about them and that we'll have them voting Democrat for the next 200 years. So what they did is they created what was called the War on Poverty. And I'm going to talk about a couple different things here, but the War on Poverty is an important thing to understand what they did, because they recognized that if you were to having some problems with the internet, which I shouldn't. Okay, so now you have what's called the War on Poverty, right? So the War on Poverty was created in a way to cause dependency. It weakens communities and causes dependency. It's based on what is known as social Darwinism. Now, what is social Darwinism? Social theory that socio-cultural advance is the product of intergroup conflict and competition, and the socially elite classes, such as those possessing wealth and power, possess biological superiority in the struggle for existence. Now, what does all that mean? So if you recall, if you looked at something beneficial and edifying, please share the video and hit the notifications button, subscribe to my channel notifications. So every time you do a video, you'll get notified of it. So if you recall, a couple of videos ago, I talked about Darwin, Charles Darwin, and their theory. See, the ruling elite is not white supremacy, but the ruling elite class of people believe that they're superior, but not just the blacks, but they believe they're superior to all the other to other ethnic groups as well. If you look at my last video that I made, the globalists, right, the ruling elite. So they believe that they are elite class, and they believe that there are defective stock, black people included, and either other ethnicities, other white people, other ruling elite, the globalist cabal. So because they adhered to Charles Darwin's philosophy. So again, if you get a chance, you can look up Charles Darwin, you can look at Galton, and you can also look at what we call now Darwinism, but that certain people are more evolved and higher status, and those are the ones who deserve to rule over the rest of humanity and society. This book is The Origin of Species through means of natural selection, which is what our theory of evolution is taught in school, is based on Charles Darwin. The subtitle is The Preservation of the Favored Races in the Struggle for Life, right? That's what Darwin's book is based on, race theory. And believe that like Malthus, which is survival of the fittest, I'm sorry, Galton, it was survival of the fittest. So he believed that, but they also believed that it would take too long for nature to do it naturally. So they believed in coming up ways and speeding up the process of weeding out the weaker strands of the human race. And so what social Darwinism is, it's the idea that certain people, poor people, people of color, and other people, that they are less evolved and they are a weaker stock of humans in their DNA. And so they set up the welfare system as a way not to be assistance, but to gain loyalty of the races. That's why since the 1960s, they have spent over $22 trillion on the war on poverty, but yet the percentage of, but what happened through the war on poverty and through this idea of social Darwinism, welfare, you have and I'm not knocking anybody who's ever had public assistance. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they set it up in a way not to help or to build up a community, but to actually, it weakens the community by weakening families and ultimately causes people to be dependent upon the government. That's what it's set up for, and to gain loyalty to a specific political party, which in this case was the Democratic Party. And if you look at Patrick Moynihan, who was a high-ranking advisor to President Johnson during the time of Johnson, he wrote that in his report. It's a very long report if you get a chance to look at it. That's why the war on poverty didn't focus on job creation. It just focused on social programs, which helped, it gave handouts to people, and therefore it weakens the character of this community and dependency. So, and again, I'm not saying things based on my own opinion. I'm talking about the data, the research, the actual writings, because Moynihan also recognized that he could see that in the near future, this was back in the 60s, that the Black father or the male. So let's look at this from the time of the arrival of Africans here up until, well, from 1865 up into the 1960s, you had about 22% out of wedlock births in the Black community. And just since 1960s till now, that has over tripled. Now you have over 70+% unwed pregnancies in the Black community. So that weakens the family. It incentivizes certain behaviors. And so if you have a baby out of wedlock, you get government assistance. If you get married, immediately they take back the benefits from you. And so that's intentional because, like I said, it weakens the family structure. It weakens the husband and the father. And so whoever helps to raise your children and provides for your household, it helps to gain loyalty. So in the Bible, God told Israel to look out for the widows and the orphans, right? And so think about it from this perspective. When the church looks out for the widows and the orphans, they actually break the cycle of dysfunction, and it causes loyalty to God, right? And to the people of God. When the state does it, it weakens the family structure and it causes loyalty to the state. There was a movie called Claudine with James Earl Jones and very famous Black lady act. It was called Claudine. And in Claudine, there was this lady, a single mother, wanted to marry the man, and he was a very hardworking man, wanted to marry her and provide for her children. But because she was on public assistance, every time the people from welfare came, she had the man couldn't be in the household, or she would lose benefits. She had to hide any gifts that he got for her. So like he bought her some like a blender or something like that. She had to hide it. So what does that do subconsciously? Subconsciously, that sends a message that the man is not the provider, but the state is, the government is. And it weakens the family unit, weakens the males in the household, and also causes governmental dependency. And that's how it was orchestrated. I thought God intended for the church to be the ones who looks out for the widows and the orphans and helps to strengthen the community. And when the church, of broken families and dysfunction, it also helps to cause loyalty to the house of God and the people of God, right? When the state does it, it perpetuates the cycle of brokenness. It incentivizes certain behaviors and causes long-term dependency upon the government, right? Now, that's not 100%. It doesn't happen all the time, but we know that there's a higher percentage of it, and we see it over the last 50 plus years since the 1960s and the implementation of the war on poverty, how the out of wedlock births have tripled in the Black community. It's tripled all the way around, but especially in the Black community has the highest demonstration of it. So it went from 22%. Now in the early part of the 20th century, it was only about a 16% out of wedlock birth rate in the Black community. By the 1960s, it was 22%. And now in the 2020s, it is over 70%. Some places record between 72 and 74% of Black babies are born out of wedlock. Again, this is not to knock anybody who's on welfare. It's not to knock anybody who has out of wedlock births. I'm just talking about the statistics and the conditions, because when you look at weakened families and you look at lack of male headship or leadership in the community, that is the thing that causes a perpetual cycle of brokenness and dysfunction. And so we have to talk to you about social justice. Social justice has become very prevalent in our communities and in our talk, and it actually has invaded even the churches. Social justice is a noun, and it calls for the fair treatment of all people in society, including respect for the rights of minorities and equitable distribution of resources among members of a community. Now, that sounds good on the surface, but when you really drill down to what social justice does, especially as it accounts for the church, what social justice does, when you take that into consideration of the critical race theory and critical theory, um, it actually it causes victimhood and victimization in the community. And so it always perpetuates the idea that you can't survive without government assistance. Because think about this, and here's one of the things that really stuck out for me. I remember years ago when Ronald Reagan was president, and it was this lady, black lady from Chicago, his statement. It wasn't a racist statement. When they investigated, they found out the lady was frauding the welfare system, and she was getting about 18 welfare checks a month. Now that was fraud. So, but because of this victim mentality, victimhood, people ignored her behavior, that she was defrauding the system, and they focused on the fact that he called her a welfare queen. So they were social programs from a political standpoint. And when you cut like Section 8 housing, or when you cut welfare benefits, they will say that that is racist. But that statement in itself is racist, and it shows just this social engineering brainwashing that has occurred, because we should never equate welfare with race. Right? If you equate welfare with race and say that if you cut welfare benefits is because you're trying to hurt black people, then what you're saying is that you are actually equating welfare with a person's race, which is black in this situation. And that's not the case. So social justice, and I'm gonna just talk about a couple of different, some of the hot topics of social justice as it pertains to this current time that we're in. So voting rights, criminal justice, healthcare, refugee crisis, racial injustice, income gap, gun violence, hunger and food insecurity, and equality. And you have to be very careful as well, because they use race a lot to divide people, to deceive people, and ultimately they use, through the media and other techniques, they social engineer us so that we will usually is something that is not positive for us. The other thing that I'd like to tell you about is be careful when people talk about equality or equity. Those are dangerous words when they're used out of context. See, there should never ever, we can't expect equality of outcomes. We should only expect equality of opportunities. So in this nation, which is called the land of opportunities, we should make sure the only thing the government should do is try as good as much as it can, which is very difficult, to try to provide for equal opportunities, but not equal outcomes. When you get into equal outcomes, then you're getting into socialism, Marxism, and it destroys communities and nations and people and individual people. Because when you're talking about equality of outcomes, like for instance, if a person works hard, saves their money, and is able to accumulate much wealth, then they deserve that. And if they want to accumulate wealth, because the Bible even talks about leaving inheritance for your children, if you accumulate a lot of wealth and you leave it to your children, that's not a bad or evil thing, right? Now, what equality of outcomes would say is that it's unfair that some children are born into great wealth and others are not. See, that's a Marxist ideology which tries to make it seem like it's evil. That's why they tax inheritances. Very, this socialist ideals taxes inheritance. A high rate of inheritance tax, which is not fair. You shouldn't have to pay a huge amount of tax just because your parent or someone left you a bunch of money, right? So, just to let you know, that LBJ was a socialist. It was called the Great Society. But what happens is they sell this idea of equality of outcomes. And if you don't think, if you're not using your logic, it seems like it makes sense. But when you really drill down to it, that's not fair. I heard Bernie Sanders say something that was really ridiculous when you really think about what he said. He said it's not fair that wealthy kids get out of college without student loans, but people that come from poor and challenged communities end up having a bunch of student debt. Now, think about this for a second. For instance, if someone in the Kennedy family, when they go to college, they wouldn't have had to pay for college because their parents are wealthy and they pay for their college, or they made a big donation to the school, or whatever the case may be. That's why they won't have student loan debt. So it has nothing to do with the fact that, you deserve to have no student loan debt. You shouldn't have. It's bad if you do have a lot of student, and it can bog you down. But if you come from a challenged background, then you may have to take out a loan in order to get a degree. Maybe you want to become a doctor, and so you can't afford to pay for school yourself. So you'd have to take out student loans. That's how the system is set up. And the student loan association was basically created for people that don't have the resources to pay for higher education, but yet they wanted to go and to make their life better. So anyway, I wanted to share these things. Got to be careful with the social justice movement. Even the social gospel. The social gospel movement was a powerful and broad religious movement. This is the definition. The late 19th and early 20th centuries that advocated many social reforms and whose ideas about social justice continue to influence policy today. The liberal Christian religious movement began after the Civil War in 1865 and continued until the 1920s. Its goal was to solve society as a whole. So you got to be careful of the social gospel movement. And the reason I say you have to be careful of that, because again, it slips into socialism and Marxism, and God never, and the government should never be in charge of those things, because that's when we slip into Marxism and communism, because the church, which is supposed to be the moral compass of a society, has been empowered by God and authorized by God to look out for the widows and the orphans and to help build up the community. When the government gets involved, what the government would do, like I said earlier, if you gained enough wealth and you were able to buy 5 houses and mansions, right, that's your right. You've been able to do that. When you introduce the equal outcomes, it would be like saying you have 5 houses, this person doesn't have any house, so the government has to come in and take 4 of your houses and give it to these 4 people over here, right? Or you've accumulated a great retirement. You might have $1 million in retirement funds, or 500,000. The government says it's not fair that you have $500,000 in retirement funds that you accumulated and saved, and this person doesn't have any. So we're going to take your money and share it with all these other people. That's the basis for Marxism, because it gives you the idea that that we are to have equal outcomes and not equal opportunities. And finally, we have to be careful because the church has bought into this as well. And again, when we focus on material wealth as the means to determine whether or not someone has a good life or not, the church should be the last one to buy into that. And it should be the church that helps to look out for the community and not the government. That's the reason why you had 501c3 in the churches, because the churches were supposed to look out for the community. And so if you donated to a nonprofit or community organization that's helping the community, they are doing the job that the government cannot do. Because one thing about it is the government does not do a good job at raising children or funding families. It's just not good at that. That's the church's job. But anyway, until next time, this is Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement. Until next time, peace and blessings to you. We'll continue this later. Gotta go. Bye-bye.